Hello, good morning. This is Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Ansari, Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. Friends, today I'm going to talk about forms of government, and in that forms of government, today I'll be talking about democracy as a form of government. Now, when we talk about democracy, we get aware of the situation around us. We have democratic institutions around us in our own country as well. So we need to understand the basic concepts and how it evolved, what are its basic features, what are the conditions, merits, demerits. That is what we are going to talk about today in this video. While conventional historical sources, they state that democracy began around 2500 years ago in some of the city-states in ancient Greek. Now it is important to know that these democratic institutions, they existed also in India in the Vedic period, as early as Vedic period, because we do have evidences of it in the form of Chanakya's Arthashastra and Shukracharya's Niti Shastra, which tells us that in ancient India, an autonomous village community with a panchayat at its head was the basic unit of local government, and it existed then. So, in that system, the accountability was built in, and the members of panchayat, they could be disqualified on account of their unaccountability or their moral turpitude or financial mismanagement if they happen to commit one. So importantly, even women were enfranchised in that autonomous village unit in India, and they had the right to candidature as well. And it was representative parliament, the product of 19th and 20th centuries, which became the central institution of democratic government later on. But Indian system, Indian society had that concept of democracy alive in that Vedic period as well. So democratic ideas, they have fueled the revolutions and revolts against the colonialism, and they laid the foundation of modern welfare state later on in 19th century, 20th century. So democracy, unlike its other twin sisters, communism and socialism, has never been identified with any kind of a definite doctrinal source. It's a byproduct of the entire development of a post-Renaissance civilization, and it indicates both as a set of ideas and a political system as well. So when we talk about meaning of democracy, we need to understand the term democracy itself is derived from the Greek words demos and kratos, and the demos means people and kratos means power. So by that very meaning, it's a power of the people. So it's now regarded as a form of government in which people rule themselves, either directly or indirectly through their representatives. So definition of democracy as a form of government are various in number, but like many other definitions in political science, they differ. The scholars, they differ in the content of democracy and its application of democracy. So Greeks, what they meant by it when they said democracy was considered as, according to Aristotle, it was a perverted form of government, because for him the polity, the mixed form, was the perfect form, and the perverted form was democratic government. But modern writers, they do not regard democracy as a perverted form of government, and they considered it in fact a best form. And to implement or bring about democracy in the 21st century around the world is one of the slogans of the developed democracies of the world. So now the emphasis is on in democracy, the emphasis is on person, that is the number of persons who are fit to perform the duties of citizen. They should all have a share in the direction of the state and the policy making of the state. So what Seeley, one of the scholars, meant by government is that in this form of government, everyone has a share. And Dicey, he defines democracy as a form of government in which the governing body is a comparatively large section of the entire nation. And Bryce, another scholar, he accepts the definition of Herodotus, the ancient philosopher of Greek, and says that democracy denotes the form of government in which the ruling power of the state is largely vested in the members of the community as a whole. So he adds, this means in a community which act by voting, that rule belongs to the majority as no other method has been found for determining peacefully and legally what is to be declared as the will of the community, which is not unanimous. Now, McIver, in the similar vein, he says democracy is not a way of governing, whether by a majority or otherwise, but primarily it's a way of determining who shall govern and broadly to what end, that is, to what purpose it will rule. So, this involves a freedom of choice in electing the rulers and the consent of the ruled and who receives the mandate of the people to rule alone rules over them. So it means that democracy has a popular base, that is the consent of the people, and it hinges upon the will of the people. So, but here the thing to be noted is that it's not the mere consent of the people that is enough to make a government democratic. The people ought to be, to use the word of Plato's own, that is watchdogs of their own liberty. So the consent of the people must be real, it must be active, must be very effective in order to make democracy genuine. So eternal vigilance is the very life of democracy. If democracy can really claim, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, so this government is, of course, always of the people. So, whatever the form of government is, whether it's monarchy, whether it's aristocracy, if it is always of the people, then it becomes a democratic. A government by the people means that people either directly or through their representatives, they govern themselves, and their will remains supreme on all questions of social direction and policy of government. So, it is not correct to say, however, that democracy is the government by the representatives of all people. So, the people has been a varying term, as Bryce points out, and it has come to mean something vastly different from what it meant to Aristotle and even to Lincoln. It now means the majority of the people. So democracy, according to Bryce, is a form of government in which the will of the majority of the qualified citizens, they rule. Now, taking the qualified citizens to constitute the great bulk of inhabitants, it is obvious that democracy allows every qualified citizens to express an opinion on affairs of the state. Now, but it cannot be secure that every man's opinion shall influence the action of the state. So all citizens cannot be made to agree on all the questions of importance. Moreover, all citizens cannot have a choice in determining the policy of the government. So even the most ardent Democrat, it won't allow any kind of vote to the criminals and infants and lunatics. So there has to be some qualification to be a voter. So participation is always limited by age and sometimes by sex as well, as it is only recently that women have been given the franchise in many leading countries, and many have not yet received. Yet still, by and large, the universal suffrage is what is being imposed throughout the world, and democracy as a form of government is accepted in most of the places. So democracy does not mean participation by all people. Whenever we speak of government by the people or the will of the people, we always invariably mean the will of the majority of the people for the time being. Now, the question of majority and minority do come up in understanding the concept of democracy. So when we say majority and minority, so there are reasons for the will of the majority to prevail in a democracy. In the first, they are considered as, on the whole, more likely to be right than the minority, because the majority, when considered as a collectivity, it possesses a wisdom of their own that may be superior to any minority. Because for one thing, it may be pointed out that there may be several minority groups in a community, and each of which claims to be superior to or profoundly wiser to the other. Now, quite frequently, one minority may clash in serious way with the others on what constitutes the real or the rational cause of action. So, by allowing the majority to govern, the problem of deciding which of the various minorities is really superior is avoided. Secondly, a majority in most cases is physically stronger than a minority. So, unless the majority grossly abuses its power, it is policy that the minority should submit to the will of the majority. But it must be admitted at the same time that coercion of a dissenting minority constitutes a special difficulty for the government, which is founded on the principles of consent, that is, on government. So democracy can be successful only when minorities they feel that they are not subjected to oppression by majority and that their case has been properly heard. So when we admit that under a democratic government there is a political equality, we mean that thereby that opportunity is provided to all citizens to pass their judgments freely and frequently on the work of the political parties who work on their behalf in the case of taking decision in representative form of democracy. So it is then only that a government can be and by the people. A democratic government cannot please everybody any more than a monarchical or an aristocratic government, but the former, it concedes every citizen to have a right of speech, publication, and association. Now, these rights are integral to democracy, and because they make possible free discussion and continuous participation of the people in the government, so government by the people must accordingly mean government by discussion and criticism. Discussion of competing ideas leading to a compromise in which all the ideas are reconciled and which can be accepted by all because it bears the imprint of all. So the kind of reconciliation, kind of discussion which brings out the middle path, that is the opinion that is acceptable to all. So the rights of minorities as those of the majority are thus embedded in the very democratic elements of freedom, equality and rationality. Because when men deliberate collectively, the goodness and rationality, they rise in their heights. And for in the course of the discussion, they exchange facts and ideas and also come to appreciate the interest and opinion of others. Now, in this way, the majority emerges with a sense of what is their own need, and that is the need of the society. And in that reconciliation, the best opinion comes out. So reasonable members of a majority will insist on justice and fair play, as reasonable members of minority will insist on submission and obedience to what has come after reconciliation. So for today's minority may become tomorrow's majority sometimes, and this makes democracy a government of restraint in which reciprocity prevails, that is restraint on majority as well as minority, and both respecting restraints relating to each other. Now, when we talk about the meaning and the functions of democratic form of government, so the meaning of the government for the people can best be explained in the word of Mazzini, who says the progress of all through all under the leading of the best and the wisest. So the test of government is the welfare of the people, and that form of government is to be preferred which gives the human tendencies the fullest scope for development. So the primary function of a democratic government, similar to those of any other form of government, but in addition to this are certain democratic stimulus to self-education for participation in government activities, opens wider horizons for the individuals and lead to broadening of their interest. So the lessons of democracy are liberty, equality, and fraternity. And rationality, its principle is that all persons who are fit to perform the duties of citizens should have a share in direction of the state, so that each man may have an identical opportunity to grow and expand to the best of his capacity, and there is no man or group of man who will exploit the weakness of others. So democracy does not differentiate between man and man. It raises the common man high on the pedestal of social and political glory, and this is the meaning of the government for the people. So for a democratic government, there must be democratic society. Now, importance of democratic society is that it is based on justice and happiness. Now, justice because no man or class of a group will be strong enough to wrong others, and happiness because each man judging best what is for his good will have every chance of pursuing that end. So the principle of liberty and equality are justified by the result they yield to the society. Now here the liberty and equality have a reference to the well-known dictum of Kant that he says, so act as to treat humanity, whether in your person or in another, in every case as an end itself and never merely as a means. So this is the requisite of a democratic society, for it instills the democratic ideals into the human mind, and it is the worth and dignity of the human being as an individual which a democratic society recognizes as it again the worth of the dignity of man, which is a democratic government provides, maintains, and guarantees. So both aim at what Bentham reduces into a very beautiful formula that everyone to count for one and no one more than one. So a democratic government therefore can exist and thrive when the society is democratic, and that should be the underlying principle of a democratic society. And in its wider meaning, it means a democracy, as Sir Stafford Cripps says, is a system of government in which every adult citizen is equally free to express his views and desires upon all subjects in whatever way he wishes, and to influence the majority of his fellow citizens to decide according to those views and to influence those desires. So it means that uniformity of belief or action is neither necessary nor desirable in democracy. So truth only comes to the clash of opinion with opinion, and every citizen has something of value to contribute, and something of value that they contribute must not hinder from bringing it forward. The truth should always prevail. So democracy is thus rooted in equality and can be found in a democratic society in which all enjoy equal rights and privileges without any barrier of class distinction. So democratic society, which is a requirement, is a society of free, equal, and active, intelligent citizens, and each man choosing his own way of life for himself and willing that others should also choose their own. So the brotherhood of man is the basis of democratic society, and all its members they all stand equal chance in common fraternity. So birth, wealth, and caste or creed do not determine the status of man. So a society which is riddled with social and economic equality, social and economic inequality cannot be called a democratic society. So social and economic inequality bring inequality of treatment and provision of rights for them. So where a common man is not as a good factor of society as another, true citizenship cannot be secured, and democratic government cannot succeed in such an undemocratic society. Now, when we see the communist perspective on this, they give a new twist to this meaning of democracy, and they say that the in democratic government, which is generally talked about, is a liberal concept of democracy, which is against the very concept of democracy which they feel. They feel the Western system has ridiculed the concept of democracy with its economic and social inequality, and regard the toleration of minority, which they claim is the hallmark of their democracy, is a show of hypocrisy, because for them the existence of minorities do not help the evolution of privileges. It is only in the socialist society which they claim to establish, which will be classless, they assert that there will be no exploiters and no exploited. So when all such distinctions and class distinctions are ameliorated and removed, that is the condition when democracy or true democracy can be manifested. So in reality, we do not find the case, because that classless society has never come about, and the state has not withered, and it has still remained. So as a theory of a society, democracy stands for that social order which recognizes inherent worth of every human being and has a never-ending faith in the common man. But such a recognition can only be ensured by the state and guaranteed by its law. So we find the democracy is difficult to define, but then it certainly has certain very common features. And Dewey has aptly said that to say that democracy is only a form of government is like saying that home is more or less a geometrical arrangement of bricks and mortar, or that church is building with pews, pulpit, and spire. So democracy, according to Barker, is mode of spirit and attitude of mind. Those who possess it and only those who profess it can practice it. So there is synchronization of thought and action, and this is the essence of democracy. And McIver says that democracy is not a way of governing, whether by majority or otherwise, but primarily a way of determining who shall govern broadly to what end. And we find further it is added that the community which acts by voting, that rule belongs to majority, as no other method has been found to determine peacefully and legally what we declared as will of community. So in definition, we move on to the type, and there are two types of democracy: pure or direct, that is direct democracy, and representative or indirect democracy. So when we talk about direct democracy, we find democracy that is where the people directly express their will in an assembly. They assemble somewhere and the people formulate and they express their will in a mass meeting, and they assemble for this purpose as often as required. So, in a small city state and of the ancient Greek and Rome, all adult male citizens were expected to meet and together in assembly, or in Athens, or one kind of an assembly where they decided about their policies. But in today's world, we do have some relics of that past in the form of Swiss Legislature, that is the popular legislature. There were 26 such popular legislatures in the middle of 18th century, and today there are only 5 which are left, and one of them has been confined to the elective functions. On Sunday in April or May, the adult male citizens in Canton, they assemble in an open-air meeting. The government affairs of the canton at such meetings. New laws are agreed upon and the old laws are changed, and taxes are levied and budgets adopted and officials are chosen. So, if you look at the conditions which are required for the pure democracy or direct democracy to succeed, we find that states with a limited or homogeneous population where people can conveniently meet and deliberate together. Now, in such a large complex societies, when the number of people is too large and the area of state is too extensive, direct democracy is impracticable. Even the Swiss cantonments, which are having that kind of parliament, open parliament, they are also limited in number. So this institution has been condemned by some writers with great enthusiasm. This institution has been commended by some writers with great enthusiasm, but chaos do prevail when the size is not that small and it becomes larger in number. So it cannot be effectively managed, and in large and complex societies where the number of people too large, area of state is too extensive, direct democracy becomes almost impracticable. Now, talking about the tools of direct democracy, the tools of referendum, initiative, recall, and plebiscite are the 4 tools which can be used and which are used time and again. Referendum means the question of politics when it is referred to electorate by both people and government for their opinion in final decision making. That is called a referendum. An initiative is power that people have to take an initiative to start or bring about any legislation or start the process of bringing about the law for the welfare of the people. Then recall is another tool which in direct democracy acts effectively when they do call back representatives who they feel from their sides are not performing well. So it can be used either way. Recall can be used for representative democracy indirectly, and when directly they do not have representatives, but if do happen to have one, then they can recall with that tool. Then plebiscite, government seeks opinion with this tool. It's a democratic tool in which the government seeks opinion on one of the question of the day or policy matter where they feel their own decision is likely to be contested by a vast majority of people. So they give it that question to plebiscite, and on that decision as decisions are made. So when we talk about indirect or representative democracy, we find the prevailing system of democracy in most of the countries is indirect because of the size and the extent of the country's territory. So the will of the state is formulated and expressed not directly by the people themselves, but by the representatives to whom they delegate the power of discussion and decision making. Now, they are referred to as representatives, and this type of government as representative democracy is the one where periodical elections are conducted and people elect their representatives. So John Stuart Mill, he defines indirect or representative democracy as one in which the whole people or some numerous portion of them, they exercise the governing power through deputies periodically elected by themselves. In representative democracy, the ultimate source of authority remains with the people, but it draws a distinction between the authority which resides in the electorate and its exercise, which is by the elected representatives. Now, the direct participation of a mass of ordinary citizens in the public life of the community and ultimate popular sovereignty is what it distinguishes the representative democracy from the direct. So voters, they elect their representatives for a number of years, and after the expiry of their term, the elected, he goes back to the masses unless he is once again elected. So if they prefer to discontinue with them, they would do so by electing new representatives, and that's how the representative democracy guarantees, in other terms, a general harmony of purpose between the government and the governed, by reconciling the effective authority and political freedom. So it must, however, be noted that voters who have returned their representatives in a majority and placed them in office to make a policy and run the government, they must not exert undue pressure on them for the successful conduct of the democracy. It's important that a degree of pressure is permissible to make the representatives remain conscious of their constituency, but it must not go out of hand. And the lawmakers and administrators must have, or they should have, a reasonable consideration for policies and programs. Although after World War I, a good deal of dissatisfaction was expressed against the working of representative democracy, and devices of popular control, that is the referendum initiative and recall, were introduced by some of the states. And these devices have only played the role of making these representatives more responsive to the needs of the people. Now, with that, I come to the end of today's presentation, where I wanted to talk about democracy and its type and its meaning and its definition. And so long. Thank you.